You can bring the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You may have heard this proverb before. The skill level of players in Final Fantasy XIV ranges from the very best, capable of beating the hardest content in relatively short order, to the more average player that is capable of beating Extremes and Savage in a reasonable time, all the way down to the players that might actually need to be carried through some of the harder, casual dungeons. This video is a bit about those players. It can be incredibly frustrating as a more skilled player to land in a group with a player like that, as sometimes they're making totally obvious mistakes that, quote, if they just took 5 minutes to read their tooltips, they wouldn't make those mistakes, unquote. Sometimes this kind of player simply didn't understand and actually will listen when you offer them advice. Other times, the reason they're making these mistakes is not because they don't know better, maybe they don't, but rather because they can't be bothered to do more. Laziness, essentially. And yet, other times, they want to figure it out themselves, but simply do not have the chops to do that. Whatever the reason may be, if someone does not want advice, there is nothing you can do. You can bring the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I want to talk about some of the most ridiculous examples of how this type of laziness, refusal to communicate, or perhaps something else can come about. More to try and recognize and understand the source of some of the mistakes, and not so much to dunk on the players that make them. And if you have any examples to add, do be sure to let me know in the comments. Number 1. Why do some healers simply not attack? Quite a while back, I released a short on this exact topic, but there's many different possible reasons why some healer players just refuse to attack. One reason why is that in many other MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV, healers either don't have the resources to spare to attack, or don't have the time to, or even that they simply don't do even remotely enough damage to justify bothering in the first place. Even in cases where they do, sometimes healers have stories about how they got blamed for a wipe because they attacked, even though them attacking had nothing to do with the wipe in the first place. The fact this can happen when there is clearly opportunities to attack can easily lead newer players to not dare attack in the first place. Here and there, you will also sometimes meet tanks or even DPS that claim healers should not attack, which is obviously incorrect, but good luck explaining that to them. Another possible reason is that newer players to the role may not quite recognize how much time they have to react to damage, or how potent their heals are, so out of fear of failure, they would much rather spam heal the tank. Stopping healing to attack is observed as a kind of risk, and while it makes the fight shorter, which should make it safer, healing incessantly is itself viewed as a sort of safety net in this context. Why this reason is seen as bad as well is that spam healing, once you get access to some of the more expensive spells, is likely to lead to the healer running out of MP, leading to even more danger, combined with the fact that both the healer and the tank having limited supply of defensive options, meaning the longer the fight drags on, the more dangerous it gets. The same also applies for the fact that while DPS jobs can do a lot of damage in short order, once that's over, everyone is running on fumes until the pull is over, or until they can burst again. So the healer not attacking increases the length of the fight and the possible danger of it exponentially. One of the most interesting examples of healers spam healing out of fear is in A Realm Reborn Extremes sometimes. I've seen this happen on Shiva Extreme, on Thornmarch Extreme, in fact, even to some degree on Sephiroth Extreme from Heavensward. Instead of understanding where the damage is coming from and responding to it as it comes, the healer chooses to simply spam heal blindly, hoping that the boss will die first before the well dries out, and it basically never works. Now, if you see yourself reflected in any of these examples I gave or give, the advice I can give you is as follows. If everyone is fine and healthy, attack. Try to recognize how much your healing options do and use them when they are valuable, instead of casting healing whenever someone is missing HP. It wastes a ton of the healing if you didn't have to heal that. Recognize what is causing the damage and respond to that. Learn which of the attacks do the damage instead of pre-casting a Medica 2 or Succor or what have you every time the boss as much as starts to sneeze. It can be scary to let go of the constant healing, but trust me, your attacking will eventually turn around and make things safer instead. That said, there are two other possible reasons for the healers not attacking. The first one is the turbo-pedantic argument, which is one I demonstrated in the short I mentioned previously. Stone doesn't heal or protect your team, it just does damage. Malefic only does damage, Broil just does damage. Why should you use them? Your job is healing, there are damage dealers in the group, it's their problem to damage the enemies, not yours. Let them do it. This argument could be partly resolved if healers' attacks had some sort of defensive component attached to them like Sage's doses. But, to be perfectly honest, I've seen Sages that also didn't attack, despite that. So, again, can't make the horse drink. This incredibly pedantic excuse can also be expanded to the other roles. There are tanks. They're supremely rare, but they exist that only use like one attack, like their AoE combo starter. They don't use cooldowns at all, they simply hold aggro because their job is to hold aggro and take hits, which they do just fine with just that one button and the tank stance. Why use defensives or healing? That's the healer's job, not mine. And this of course also expands to DPS, although less obviously. My job is to do damage, why should I worry about healing or damage reduction? The tank takes the damage, the healer heals it. I do the damage. If my funny voices didn't give it away, surely the average player can already see the absurdity in all three stances by now. The reality is, while you do your job, if you have the capacity to help with the other tasks, you can make things easier for everyone, thereby making things easier for you. The healer attacking makes the fights go faster. The tanks and DPS using their defensive options gives the healer openings to attack more. By everyone working together, the duty ends faster. Now, the final likely reason for healers not attacking tends to boil down to straight up just laziness. If the healer only acts when they need to heal, then they have more time to, I don't know, watch a TV series on their other monitor or eat cereal or whatever. This reasoning also tends to explain why, surprisingly often, when a healer is not attacking and is fully, quote-unquote, focused on healing, they tend to heal worse than someone that does a bit of both. This laziness is also often defended with the previously mentioned pedantic argument. The tank doesn't want to press more buttons and so on. Very frustrating to deal with, and ultimately, as long as they're doing the minimum to clear the duty, you can only really choose between putting up with it or not, and without confronting them, you might not be able to tell whether they are playing like this out of fear or out of laziness. Number 2. Well, I'm just leveling it to max, and when I do, I'm never playing this again. You may have met this kind of excuse or even given it yourself at some point, when leveling a job you find very difficult to play well. Particularly common with black mages if you ask me. Essentially saying, it is okay for me to play badly because I have no interest in improving in the first place. Once again, you cannot force the horse to drink. If they don't want to learn, there isn't much you can do. However, if you, yes you, the person watching this video, has used this reason before, remember that there are ways to level jobs without involving other players that might judge you for doing this. In fact, there are ways to level jobs without even playing them, such as Wondrous Tales and Frontline. my advice would be to use those kinds of methods for leveling if you don't want to play the job anyway. Notably, duty support can be used to level somewhat as long as you can stay alive in a fight. With all that said though, this is a genuine question. What's the point of playing the game if you're not having fun? Why bother leveling that job that you hate so much that you don't even want to give it a chance? In fact, at least trying will probably make the leveling go faster, meaning you have to spend less time on it. Doesn't that sound nice? Number 3. Players that only use cooldowns on bosses. This one, just to be clear, is most of the time more of a misunderstanding, and typically boils down to one of two things, and applies for all roles. 1. I'm saving my cooldowns for the hard parts, with the implication being that the bosses are the hard parts. In a dungeon, most of the time, unless a boss has some sort of difficult to understand mechanic, the AoE pulls are the hard part, and holding cooldowns makes it harder, meaning that holding the cooldowns for the bosses makes the AoE pulls even more dangerous as a result. On top of this, in an average group that is using their cooldowns, it usually takes around 2 minutes from beginning the burst on the first AoE pull until you reach the boss, with a few exceptions, meaning that holding those cooldowns is more likely to mean you simply don't get to have as many cooldowns over the course of the duty. 2. I think it is more fun to use everything on the bosses. This one is harder to argue against, since it is a feelings-based argument. However, the fact that using your cooldowns as you get them is likely to lead you to getting your cooldowns for the boss anyway is often pretty reasonable, right? In fact, it is perfectly possible your group does not do enough damage to reach the boss before the 2-minute cooldowns are ready again, so you could just not use them if they come up during the last pack before the boss. Simple way to get it both ways without it slowing down the group too much. There's also the extra detail that even if you use your cooldowns right as the boss fight starts, most of the time it doesn't mean you get more bursts for the boss. And in fact, starting a fight with an awkward opener you have to freestyle a bit might be great practice for when things go sideways in the future. Number 4. Tanks that never advance beyond pulling 1 pack at a time. Similar to the last one, this is usually more of a misunderstanding. Some newer tanks may be afraid of failure, just like the healers I mentioned earlier. And pulling more packs at a time should be more dangerous, and it's not like you ever become less afraid of pulling more when you've never tried it. As long as you don't try it, it's like a black box, an unknown factor. You don't know how it'll be unless you test it. Add on to this that the average group of players are used to pulling more, so when the tank doesn't, the rest of the group might not be sure what to do and might hold their cooldowns, thereby making this smaller pull more dangerous than it had to be, which then causes the newer tank to think that a bigger pull would be even harder as a result. Similarly, due to the way cooldowns tend to scale up with more targets, both defensively and offensively, when options are being used, pulling 1 pack and not using cooldowns is often harder than pulling 2 or more and using cooldowns. So, if you are one of these tanks, afraid of pulling more, give it a chance. It might just be easier than you think. And with those topics covered, there are 2 more things I would like to quickly talk about. The first one is obviously all of the examples I gave so far can be explained with someone being lazy just giving an excuse to not try harder. But sometimes the fact a player is actually inexperienced or afraid of failure is interpreted as laziness or refusal to improve. So, try to offer advice before you attack anyone. In fact, just don't attack people. If you do see players that are playing worse than expected, you could at least try to help, although I understand many would rather just not. The second thing is the fact that this game is actually quite old at this point. Each person has a different amount of time and experience with Final Fantasy XIV, or similar games, or even just games in general. Just understanding general game mechanics can put you miles ahead of someone for which Final Fantasy XIV is their first game. Unlikely, but possible. Some players are capable of beating the current Savage raid tier with relative ease within a couple months of picking up the game. Others just never get to that point. I want to be clear that at no point in the previous examples were I giving examples or expectations that players should all be masters of the various jobs, and my observations and expectations peak at least try, for your own sake. After all, I have demonstrated previously that as long as you just do the mechanics right in a duty, you can beat a regular dungeon like Vanguard while only using the bare minimum of your toolkit. So the motivation to do more than that is more about fun and going a bit faster, and not because you need to in casual content. But if you are looking at playing a game, only ever doing the absolute bare minimum to succeed, then why are you playing? At that point, it sounds like you play the game because you have to, and not because you want to. But what do you think? Have you met a lot of players like this? Personally, I meet them here and there, but have heard a lot of stories about these kinds of players, in every category mentioned. When you did meet them, did you try and do something about it? Did you manage to give them advice? Did they use it? Or did you also conclude sometimes, just like I also do, that even if you did try to give them advice, it would probably fall on deaf ears? The horse would not drink. Please do let me know in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Stormblood, healers relied on a stance called Cleric Stance to make their attacks do relevant damage, making actually attacking much more of a commitment. Supposedly, this was only intended to enable healers to do damage in solo content where they needed to, but it's not like it was exclusively available for that, leading to a lot of healers assisting with attacks when able to.